over our heads on the television is live shots of New York after the towers have come down. So we're sitting there and the president, in the most focused, calm, deliberate way, explains to us everything that had happened that morning. And I remember thinking that this moment in American history and the focus and the calm of the president, and I shook his hand and I said, "God bless you, Mr. President."
Hi, everyone. This is Joel Kopperud, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs here at the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers. And thank you for dialing into the latest episode of Politics and Risk. We've got a special episode for you all today. It's rare that we find ourselves in these moments where worlds collide, but the universe clearly brings people together for a reason. And first of all, I want to introduce Matt Kirk to everyone. He's our incoming chairman of the Advocacy Committee, and he serves at Acrisure as the head of North American Retail Placement. He's going to be a great resource for the Advocacy Committee, a great leader for us, and we've got a lot of hurdles and issues to fight in the next Congress, and we will really look forward to working and partnering together with Matt. He's always been good to us and good to our team, and will continue to serve the industry well. This podcast, though, is going to focus on the nexus of Matt and our latest addition to the government affairs team, Audra Jackson. They both served as OLA staffers in the White House. The OLA is the Office of Legislative Affairs. And I didn't realize this, but once you are a staffer in the Office of Legislative Affairs at the White House, you are a member of a very small, tight community. And it doesn't matter which administration you served in, but everyone relies on each other in previous past experiences and lessons because it is so rare to experience and go through what they went through. And I learned that when we had a welcome party for Audra in our office when she started last year, and a colleague of ours who served in the Bush administration at the tail end of the administration joined, and he didn't realize Audra worked at OLA for the Biden administration, and he got really excited and he was like, "Oh my God." And he shared with me how it's kind of like a fraternity or sorority in ways where it's just a strong network. It doesn't matter what party you were in. So Matt served in OLA under George W. Bush at the beginning of the term. Prior to that, he worked in the United States Senate. Audra served in OLA in the Biden administration. Prior to that, she served in the House. And it's just such a unique experience. And you both have so many crazy inside Washington stories. I just wanted to use this episode to talk about that, your stories, and share with everyone how lucky we are to have you all on our team, and how lucky the industry is, and how much we will benefit from the lessons you've both learned from those amazing experiences. So thank you for being here. So Matt, why don't you kick us off? Why don't you start telling us how did you end up in the White House?
Yeah, no, thanks, Joel and Audra. Great to join you guys today, and to my colleagues at CIAB and across the industry. Just thank you for the honor to chair the Advocacy Committee. I can't wait to get into it. I'm probably going to drive Joel crazy because I still love this stuff. Even though I had 16 years at the Hartford and I'm round 4 at Acrisure, it still feels like it was yesterday. So can't wait to dive in. But so my background, I went right into politics. So worked in the U.S. Senate in the Republican Whip's office. And then when President Bush came in, and this is kind of a staple of OLA actually, oftentimes, especially a governor who becomes president, brings with them their staff, their most trusted people that help them get to where they had to get. But the one office that is staffed really from Washington when an administration comes in is the Office of Legislative Affairs, because, of course, a new president turns and looks to the Hill and says, "I'm going to need people from Capitol Hill that are plugged in, understand how to get things done, can work on my behalf." And so not only is OLA unique, it's unique in the sense that most of the OLA team doesn't come from the campaign. So not only do you got to get Capitol Hill to like you, you probably got to get a bunch of new friends in the White House to like you because you're not from their world. But so before I hand to Audra and hear her story, I'll just give you 2 thoughts that I think define Office of Legislative Affairs. And the first one I am stealing from a colleague, but he used to refer to it as an ambulatory bridge over a constitutional divide.
Hmm.
And I always loved that term because you kind of go, all right, I got to look up some of those words. But what he really meant was Article 1,
Yeah.
the Congress, the power base of law writing, and Article 2, the executive. And your job is to figure out how to get these two very different institutions to work together. But let me turn it over to Audra to hear her story.
Oh my God, Matt, I love that you said that. I'll tell you my story. But I found myself, excuse me, so many times having conversations with colleagues in the White House of how important Congress was and why OLA needed to be in this meeting. And I love that analogy of what OLA was. And I would say too, one of my colleagues said we were almost like the swamp that absorbed all the craziness that came from Congress, but I felt like it was my honor and it was a duty to work in OLA. And even when a member of Congress, and you worked, I think, on the House team too, and I was a House SAP.
I was a Senate guy.
Oh, you were Senate? Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's a big deal, Audra.
Oh my God, Matt. I thought it was the House office. I was literally reading it.
How we get all bent out of shape.
No, Matt, let me tell you, I actually work very well with my Senate colleagues, but I know there's a big difference for many reasons, the upper chamber. But we would talk about just kind of the importance of OLA, and even when a member or a House member would yell or be very upset with us, I was like, they're representing their constituents. So it was an honor for me to do that job. But I got over to OLA coming from the House Democratic Cloakroom. I was on the House floor for about 4 years. And so I learned all the floor procedure, learned the members of Congress, their dynamics. And I was telling Joel this. I never thought I would work at the White House. It wasn't like per se an aspiration because I love the Hill. I'm like a House person, just like you're a Senate person. But I love the House so much. I love the members. I love the energy of the House floor. So I never thought I would move over to the White House. But when the opportunity came to apply for one of the House liaison jobs, I just was like, sure, I jumped right in and served the last 2 years of President Biden, and it was probably the hardest job, but one of the most rewarding jobs I've ever had. And I was honored to be a public servant in that role. So
when I talk to people about OLA, I always frame OLA and people who work there as the president's lobbyists.
Yeah.
Not every president that comes in. I think every president that has come in since George H.W. Bush has enjoyed a majority in Congress in both chambers, and they've all passed reconciliation bills, which is the bulk of their agenda. Matt, it's how President George W. Bush got the Bush tax cuts done. It's how Joe Biden got the American Rescue Plan done and the Inflation Reduction Act done. What were some of your all's greatest, do you feel like your greatest achievements that you were deeply involved in when it came to advocating for the president's agenda?
Well, Joel, I'll start, Audra, and then turn over to you, and I'll hit one that obviously is very much in our industry, which is the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act. And so I happened to be in the White House from 2001 through 2005. And so obviously not long after 9/11, literally within days, we started looking at a host of things. And those of you may remember the Patriot Act. You remember the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. Our dear friends at TSA came out of that. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we immediately started looking at was how are we going to create capacity that can sit at some layer that will allow, from a transactional perspective, the economy to in effect churn, that there is some insurance coverage for an act of terrorism. And of course, it's interesting when you go all the way back and thinking about today and bringing forward for our colleagues. At the time, you had a pool in Spain, you had a pool in Great Britain because they had dealt with terrorism on different levels, not kind of a 9/11 dynamic. So we looked around the globe, we met with people from around the world, talked to the Capitol Hill day in and day out about the creation of TRIA. But this is a classic OLA story, how this thing came to a head. And if I could leave everybody with one thing, because a lot of folks who may see this are in the sales business, and so this will ring right home with them, which is time kills all deals. And so any good management of the Senate or the House, you got to know when we close a deal, we better get to a vote quick. because at that moment in time, we've got the votes, but if time starts to set in, the votes go away. Time kills all deals. And so great schedulers, in effect, of the Senate and House, meaning the leader and the speaker, understand this deeply. So the creation of TRIA, the other act that was moving through at the same time was Sarbanes-Oxley. So there was a whole host of choices that had to be made between a Democratic Senate, because Senator Jeffords had switched parties, and then the House, which was Republican run, and how this deal was going to come together. And so the way it came together ended up in a Capitol hideaway. So for everybody who doesn't understand what that means, you look at the Capitol, and behind it, there's 3 office buildings for the House, there's 3 office buildings for the Senate, filled with the senators, their staff, the House members, their staff. But members of Congress, some of them, a lot of senators and some of the House members have what's called a hideaway, which is an office in the Capitol. It's kind of a private office. You won't find staff seated outside of it. Well, Senator Dodd at the time was the leader for the Democrats on the banking committee. And in his hideaway, we find negotiating Chairman Oxley, Republican from the House, Senator Dodd, myself, and then 2 other representatives, one from White House National Economic Council, one from the Treasury. This negotiation starts probably late afternoon, about 4 a.m, as we've got people on call, we got legislative counsel on call. Chairman Oxley finally leaves his staff and says, guys, you know where I am on these things. You can finish it up. Meanwhile, Senator Dodd stays up with us, and at 6 a.m. we cut the deal. That became TRIA.
Wow.
So we shake hands. I fortunately lived on Capitol Hill, so I could walk out. I run to my little basement apartment at the time, shower, shave, put on a new suit, zip down to my start the day at the White House and brief, we've got a deal on TRIA, but we got to get it to a vote because this thing can unravel in a second. There are a whole host of controversial issues. And sure enough, we got that thing through the House and the Senate in the context of Patriot Act, SOX, and everything else. But those are some of the crazy things you do in legislative affairs, is you're literally up all night long in a Senate hideaway with a small group of people, leg counsel on the phone, going, I's and T's through a piece of legislation. And then you got to turn around and become its biggest lobbyist within an hour and get that thing through Congress.
Audra, what do you have from the Biden administration? There was so much happening.
It was so much. And I will say my first thought was the Fiscal Responsibility Act that we had to whip. And so this was a crazy time. This is right when I started OLA. I started in OLA April 17th, 2023. I will always remember the day. I was so excited. And I think the Fiscal Responsibility Act was coming out, or they negotiated it in May. But I was new. I had my 80 members of Congress. I had to meet with every member just so they can know who I was. But that was probably the hardest time because my boss was negotiating with Speaker McCarthy's team and a few other folks. And it got really, really intense because this was to increase the debt ceiling and have a few other priorities in it. So we were in so many meetings. We end up, so on the Dem side, President Biden, I think we increased the age for SNAP recipients. And so many of our members were like, you sold us out. This is crazy. So I'm taking phone calls from members trying to push out factual information of what we actually did. And then we go into the caucus meeting, the House Dem caucus meeting. It was 5 OLA SAPs, and then of course senior advisors briefing the members. And we ended up having a vote, almost a supermajority vote on this bill from the House side. But it was crazy because I had just started and I didn't know what it meant to really whip a vote on behalf of the president. And taking calls, going to offices. Luckily, I had done the heavy lifting the first 2 weeks I started. But I will always remember that bill. I still have it signed because it was such a unique time, and you felt like the weight of the government and really the weight of the national economy was on our shoulders, because if we didn't have a deal, we wouldn't be okay today, actually. So I will say Republicans get upset about some of the provisions Speaker McCarthy had negotiated in.
I can only imagine some of the jarring conversations you've had to have with very big personalities and leaders in Congress. Is there one that sticks out in your mind particularly? You don't have to name the politician, but
I won't name the person, but I will say a public letter came out for a group of people that I was the liaison for, over a topic of judges. And we end up that like a couple days later, probably a week later, we were all in the office with the president's chief of staff. And so, mind you, this was probably like month 3 that I was in this job too. So, like in the meeting with the chief of staff, and about 8 members of Congress was pretty terrifying. But you learn. For me, I learned that, or I always thought like these members have real concerns, even though they have expressed them in ways that are not helpful for the president. And then I rose to the occasion. But that was a tough week, because you're prepping the chief of staff, you're prepping like your boss, my boss. But it ended up turning out okay.
it's worth noting too, you all served in very different Washingtons. I mean, this Washington, the Washington, Audra, you served in, is
Yeah.
wildly politically toxic. Whereas Bennett, I feel like but there was more legislating in your day.
I'll tell you a story that you almost can't believe it today, because you can't imagine something like this would happen related to bipartisanship. So first, I got to tell you when the blood ran out of my face prior to this story on the topic. So I get called up, which I'm sure Audra's familiar with. The head of legislative affairs has an office right there in the West Wing. I go up into his office and he says to me, "We got a task for you next year. We're going to take some stuff off your plate." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, either the Democrats are going to create a prescription drug benefit in the way that they want to do it, or we're going to have to come up with something that is a presidential proposal that can inject some kind of Republican healthcare principles into it, and we're going to do it more on our terms." I said, "Sure." I'm kind of the financial services, labor employment guy. And he looks at me and he says, "Look, I know you're not deep into healthcare. You're like, surface level healthcare guy, but you can count votes. And most importantly, you can count Democratic votes." And he said, "So you are going to become the Medicare Part D guy in 2003 and help create the drug benefit and get it through the Senate and do it with Democratic votes. So good luck, Kirk." I was like, whoa. And so I sat back and I'm thinking at the time, how are we going to do this? Because as Audra knows, and anyone who's been around Washington knows, healthcare is one of the most polarizing issues, even back then, between the two parties. There's not, and in the context of that, adding a huge new expense into the Medicare program, i.e. a drug benefit, even more polarizing. And so now I could keep you guys on this camera for 12 hours telling the stories, but let me just hit 2 important things. First, the Senate Finance Committee. We sat with Senator Baucus over and over. At the time, he's the ranking member, because Republicans had taken the Senate by a margin in 2002. They took it back. And I kept looking at him and I said, "Senator, we need your support. You can shape the course of history if you can work with us in finance and stay with Chairman Grassley, so on and so forth." And he had a great staffer. I'm going to leave all the staffers' names out, but he had a great staffer, and she was tough, but she was transparent and honest. And so sure enough, we get a 16-5 vote out of finance. So that's part one. We got out of finance. And like, people are like, what the heck is going on? That never happens on a huge entitlement change healthcare bill. Meanwhile, the House is ramming this thing through on a partisan basis. That's what they do. So we get to the floor, and I knew we'd have 2 things: a budget point of order, which you need 60 votes to waive because this thing wasn't a reconciliation bill. And then secondly, obviously a filibuster, same thing. You got 60 votes. So this could not pass. We have 51 Republicans. This could not pass without 60 votes. And this is the number one priority. So the House makes it about as hard as humanly possible on us, because they kept a vote open from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. to ram their drug benefit through the House in a 220 to 215 vote. So now we're, the Democrats are starting to get squeamish on this. Blah, 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 blah. Anyway, the whole thing's coming to a head on a budget point of order. because that was where the Republicans were kind of seeing their opportunity to say, well, this and that. We win that vote by a miracle. We got 61 votes, but then the great moment, and this is my final comment on this one. We get to final passage, and I'm at Joel and Audra, just imagine final passage on a hundreds of $billions healthcare change to an entitlement. And on final passage, 54 to 44, 2 Democrats were gone. On final passage, 54 to 44, 12 Democrats vote for the bill, 9 Republicans vote against it. So basically almost 20% of the Republican caucus opposed the bill, even though they were in the majority, and 25% of the Democratic caucus voted for the bill, even though they were in the minority, and we passed on a bipartisan basis Medicare Part D. Joel, I can't come up with a scenario where something like that could happen today.
Yeah, it's insane. You said we had Senator Maggie Hassan in our office this morning. She's now found herself as one of the most moderate members in the Senate, and she's deeply involved in negotiating the ACA premium stuff. But you said earlier, time kills all deals. And it reminded me this morning, Senator Hassan said that Republicans, they've got to scramble when they get the president to agree to something. They have to scramble to get it done because he can change his mind like so
I can't imagine it must be tough being in OLA. Yeah,
Matt, I thought the same thing under both President Trump's terms, how OLA it was so tough. And I know sometimes they would say a member, all they had to do is call the White House switchboard and ask to be connected to the president. And then, he would answer sometimes. And I'm like, I'm sure OLA was like, I need the notes from the meeting. What happened?
Absolutely.
But it was pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
What can you tell us? What's your most memorable interaction or moment with the president?
Oh, Matt, you probably have.
Well, I have a big one, and and maybe I'll mention that one today more historically. When a president travels on Air Force One, and there are members of Congress traveling, or they're playing some role in the event. Sometimes it's not always because they're on the plane, but maybe the event they're playing a role in that he's going to. Someone from the Office of Legislative Affairs travels with the president in order to, be with the members on the plane, handle anything related to the Congress. And so I happen to be the one from the Office of Legislative Affairs who traveled with him on September 10th, 2011, down to Florida. And so we go down to Florida, and it's a pretty easy trip. And Audra will probably laugh. Some of these trips are complicated and long. This was, as everybody remembers from 9/11, this was an education trip promoting the bill that President Kennedy actually had worked on with him, No Child Left Behind, and just doing some visits to schools, not a lot, pretty easy trip. And so we get down, obviously the morning of 9/11, we go over to the school, and then tragedy hits. And, when you step back and think about that moment now, I mean, it's a Pearl Harbor-esque moment, right? Except there wasn't, at least in people's minds, a global war happening. So this happens in a sense for people as a complete surprise. And so we're at the school, we get in the motorcade, we get on the plane, and on the plane, we take off, we're headed for Andrews Air Force Base, and all this is in the public domain. So I wouldn't be saying anything that isn't in the public domain. We're headed for Andrews Air Force Base to come get the president back to Washington. And there's 2 congressmen on the plane with me, two members of the House from Florida, Adam Putnam and Dan Miller. And so about halfway, we actually had turned around in the air. For everybody who knows the history, we ended up going to Shreveport, Louisiana, instead of going to Andrews Air Force Base. And when we're in the air, before we land in Shreveport, the president's aide de camp, there's someone in every White House who's with the president wherever they go, comes back and says, the president would like to meet with you and the 2 congressmen. So this is on Air Force One before we landed in Louisiana that morning. And we go into the president's office, and on Air Force, it's a tiny office. So it's not, don't think like a big office. It's a small office. And over our heads on the television is live shots of New York after the towers have come down. So we're sitting there, and the president, in the most focused, calm, deliberate way, explains to us everything that had happened that morning. He says, I want you to know what's going on. And he walks through the plane that went down in Pennsylvania, all the things that had happened. Then, almost as though he's like, should be worried about us, he says, we're going to take a number of people off the plane at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, including you. You'll get back to Washington. I've got to go on to NORAD before we returned to Washington, which is a North American Air Defense in Nebraska. And I remember I shook his hand. There's pictures of this. Yeah, I don't even put them out. Like I keep them in a drawer because it feels so odd and such a sad day. And I shook his hand and I said, "God bless you, Mr. President." And I walked out, and I was a young guy at the time. And I remember thinking that this moment in American history and the focus and the calm of the president and just the way he walked us through it and just his courtesy, almost like this is what's about to happen next. And I went and sat back down on the plane. And obviously for the rest of my life, I'll never forget that one.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of
Oh my God.
moments in American history, yeah, Audra, I want to hear your stories about President Biden too. But while we're on this this topic, you were on the House floor on January 6th working for Speaker Pelosi. I'm sure you've got some remarkable stories about how these leaders, how they faced such traumatic experiences, but persevered and got to the other side. The president obviously saw through some crazy moments. The speaker, I think, is pretty remarkable for bringing the House back after that attack and continuing to count the votes even after midnight.
Yeah.
What was that?
First, I want to just say, Matt, that story, I mean, I'm very emotional in general. So you telling that story, I'm like, oh my God, I want to cry. Just the humanity that was shown by President Bush is beautiful. But yes, I was on the House floor on January 6th, and I remember waking up like a little bit nervous. And sometimes I would be nervous in general because just life. But I remember waking up a little bit nervous, but I was like, okay, we'll go through the day. There's always protesters. You never really think it's going to be something big. And I will never forget, I went to the restroom, and this was around noon. So when they opened the house up and we were going to start certifying the election results, I went to the restroom because you kind of started hearing rumblings of, people are coming over to the Capitol. And before that, when President Trump said, we're going up to the Capitol, I will never forget, our people were like, can he come up here? And the advice that was given was, he doesn't have to be addressed by the speaker. If he comes to the House floor, that it's the speaker's, it's the House chamber, and the speaker has control over the chamber. So anyways, around noon, I go to the ladies' restroom. So, it's right off the House floor. You can see over the lawn. And I started seeing people, and I started hearing all the pagers go off on the Capitol Police. And I went back in the office, and I was like, oh my God, I think this is going to be a little serious. So they tried to adjourn or recess us twice. Speaker Pelosi she was like, we're going to keep on proceeding. But then the second time, the Capitol Police just like almost yanked her off the speaker's rostrum because they were like, you have to go. So a speaker pro tem goes in, and then maybe 5 minutes later, we are recessed. And so then they bring everybody out. So I was in the cloakroom. They bring everybody out, staff, all the members of Congress, and have everybody sit on the in the House chamber. And I remember the security came on and was like, you might have to like duck or whatever. They've infiltrated the Capitol. And this is how adrenaline works. I remember thinking, okay, I guess I have to fight. Mind you, I've never like fought in my life. Like, I don't know how to fight, but adrenaline is rushing. So you're just kind of like, okay, I guess I have to like defend myself. But by the grace of God, I will say this, I maybe somehow like 2 minutes after that, they escort us all out. They're like, everybody's time to leave. So they escort us out the side of the House chamber, but we're hearing them beat on the doors. The protesters or rioters beat on the door. And somehow we got out before everything happened. And my boss, who's a manager of the cloakroom for about 10 years, but been in the cloakroom about 30 years, says he remembers hearing the glass shatter. He said, I will never forget hearing that from the House chamber doors. And so we run and go to the safe place. And I remember being like, what is going on? Of course, I'm texting my family, all my aunts and uncles, my parents were so nervous. And we sit in this room, and I will say Liz Cheney and Hakeem Jeffries, because they were the caucus chairs at that point, both went up to the podium and addressed the body. So all the members, everybody that was there and staff, in such a way that was, we're here to be safe. We're like, just showed real, true leadership. And so when eventually everything gets cleared out after midnight, Speaker Pelosi comes back in. And I remember this so vividly. She took this deep breath, like this sigh, not a sigh, but like a deep breath of like, and addressed us. And it was like, you could tell it was like, this is a lot, but we're going to persevere. And I was just like, okay. Of course, I was still so nervous. And then a member of Congress, it's actually Jason Crow. I told this to Mitchell this past week. And Jason Crow, I was like, I'm not going back. Like, I don't even want to be here. These people are crazy. I was so, so scared. But Jason Crow told me and my colleague, because he overheard me like, no, I don't want to go. He said, I think it's okay for y'all to go back. I think we're going to be safe. And I think I wrote him a thank you letter, but to this day, him saying that actually allowed me to feel safe to go back to the House chamber. And I remember going home that night. So we were, of course, we certified the election, all this stuff happens. We're still in shock sitting there, still trying to do our job. But I remember going home that night and I always try to do a gratitude journal. And it was like 4 a.m. I wrote this. I said, thank you, God, for allowing me to come home, make it home safely. And then that next morning, the adrenaline wore off and I felt every bit of the trauma of that day. And I like couldn't stop crying. It was a whole thing. But it was so many, the leadership on so many parts. Speaker Pelosi, members of Congress, my colleagues, that really allowed us to get through such a horrible day in our nation's history. But it happened and it was a part of our history. And I think about me having lived it and grateful that we were okay, that the people there were okay. But it was a crazy day. And something beautiful, the U.S. Capitol Historical Society actually did interviews with people. And I think that interview helped me realize like how monumental that day was, but also it gave me a sigh of relief just to share my story of what I went through. So
Wow.
crazy day.
Yeah, wild. You both talked about leadership and the incredible leaders that guided you through that moment. It's worth noting that you both are incredible leaders yourselves. And everyone that worked under you, we all remember what it's like to be a protege. You both have proteges that have benefited from your leadership and your perspective and strength.
Joel, maybe final comment from me, because it's what you do every day. And it's what the council does, is when I think of almost a proudest moment from an OLA era, I had this little going away deal. My colleagues at the White House, we went over to the old executive office building in that kind of fancy room and had a going away thing. And one of my colleagues got up and said, I'm going to surprise Matt with this. I'm going to read a note. He probably doesn't know that's coming. And it was the most gracious letter from Senator Paul Sarbanes, who, for anybody who remembers him, he is a liberal Democrat from Maryland. I was a Republican, but we had done TRIA 1, TRIA 2. We had done SOX. We had done Fair Credit Reporting Act. We had done countless nominees through the banking committee together. And he was the most respectful person. His staff were respectful to me. And of course, I was respectful back to them. We got a lot done. And I saved that note because, there are a lot of you're the coolest stuff from the Republicans, which is great. They're all my pals. But I remember it just meant so much to me. And it just showed the respect, from in essence, someone who didn't have to. He took the time to say, hey, make sure someone gets this to Matt. And those are the days we got to get back to. But my pointed comment is the relationships mean everything. And I know you guys do that every day, Joel, and I look forward to supporting you over the next year in my role.
Thank you. We're so grateful to have you, Matt.
Yeah.
And I should echo that sentiment. When I was interviewing for Audra's role, of course, I called some friends on the Hill, and I didn't know Audra, and what do you all think of her? And of course, my phone was going off of people chiming in to support her application, and I got a phone call from the chief of staff to a conservative Republican House member, and he told me, echoing the story that you just shared, Matt. He said, look, when I go home, he's like, we are in one of the reddest seats ever. This is a safe Republican district. I go home and our constituents are just screaming impeach Biden and all that stuff. And he said, and I got to tell them sometimes, like, look, take the temperature down. There are actually a lot of good people in the Biden administration trying to do good things. And he's told me when I say that, I'm thinking specifically of Audra Jackson. So despite all this toxicity that we see in the mainstream news and the press and CNN and Fox News and all of that, at a staffer level, there is still a lot happening behind the scenes to get things done. And that's where we lean in. You all understand, our members understand, if our industry, if our association, this association has a political agenda, it is to strengthen and build out the political center so we can have lasting bipartisan solutions. Because if they're not bipartisan, they won't be lasting. And we have seen that time and time again. So thank you both for your time. Thank you to all of our listeners for dialing in and listening to this conversation. I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Great to see you guys. Thanks.